Are we close to a global energy crisis? It's a pleasure to talk to Osama Hizvi, energy analyst, economic and geopolitical analyst, consultant, advisor. He is frequently a writer in several different newspapers and with interviews, a very well-known name, internationally speaking. Good afternoon, Osama Hizvi.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. It's actually quite late here, so it's like good evening sort of a thing. Yeah, nearing to
Yeah, yeah.
midnight. Yeah,
Yeah, midnight for you. Yeah, 11
yeah.
p.m. for you. 3 p.m. for me here in Brazil.
Wow. Okay.
Hizvi, please, Ukraine-Russia conflict and now Israel-Hamas conflict, a very complicated one. So risks can affect energy flows, of course, but what do you consider? We are close to a global energy crisis or not?
I think. Can you hear me? Sorry, I kind of lost you there. Can you
No
hear me
problem.
now?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. So I think the chances of a global energy crisis are still there and still would have been there even if there was no conflict in the Middle East at the moment. Why do I say that? Because after the Russia-Ukrainian war, the energy prices, if we talk about the 5-year moving averages or the 10-year moving averages, the energy prices have still stayed on the higher side. And not only that, we also have one of the most aggressive monetary policy tightening cycle going on across the world. And specifically, I'm talking about the Fed's monetary policy tightening. So there was a recent chart, I'll send it to you afterwards, very interesting one that we showed in our show at Primary Region Network. And it showed how Pakistan is the third most vulnerable country to rising US interest rates. So, and some people might be thinking that why am I talking about interest rates while you have asked me about energy prices? So, as I'll give you the case for Pakistan. Pakistan recently suffered from an extraordinary, unprecedented rise in electricity bills. My own electricity bill increased about 100% month on month basis.
My God.
Yes. Yeah. So, and why was that happening? That happened primarily because our currency had depreciated against the dollar. Most of the currencies across the world have depreciated against the dollar. We know the DXY, the dollar index, recently touched its highest levels ever as well.
Yeah.
And the vicissitudes in the international energy markets have been as such that the prices have been on the higher side. Natural gas prices, for instance, touched they increased almost 5 times to their average levels after the Russia-Ukrainian war. And Pakistan uses natural gas. 30% of the natural gas is imported, and 70% of the coal is imported. And coal prices recently hit its highest level. We all know, right? So both of these things are imported to make electricity. And when you are making electricity by importing 30% and 70% of items, and those are priced in dollars, so naturally you would have an electricity or energy prices overall. So that's there, but definitely the eruption of violence, the escalation in the Middle East has certainly increased the chances of a global energy crisis. It has exacerbated the fault lines that already existed recently, and countries like Pakistan or like the developing world or the global South, they stand to bear some adverse effects, disproportionate adverse effects from such developments. If we talk about Israel and Gaza conflict, there was recently a very interesting article, and I also covered it in my Monday Macro View as well. There were 3 scenarios discussed. So if the war is confined, and so far we it it seems like that the war would be confined, but we never know. So if even if the war is confined, there can be a $3 to $4 jump in the oil prices. I believe that can be because of the war of words, as we call it, the heated rhetoric, the exchange of words between, let's say Iranian side or some sorts of warnings by US, or maybe they sent some whatever is left of their military equipment to the Middle East as well. as they have been doing so. And the second scenario, where Iran is properly engaged in a proxy war here, that can result into a jump of about, that can take the global inflation level to 6%, back to 6%. That can wipe off about 300 to 500 billion dollars of the GDP output from the global economy. And of course, that would mean that would be chaotic for countries like Pakistan as well. In that case, I think yes, the global energy crisis would worsen. Third scenario is an all-out war, and let's just hope and pray that never happens. In that case, the global economy would dip into a recession. I think, if I'm not mistaken, about $1 trillion of output from this global GDP can be wiped off, and oil prices can touch $150, essentially, causing all sorts of prices, not only an energy crisis. So, I mean, these are three scenarios.
Sorry, Rizvi, which
Yeah.
probability? What's the probability for each one of these three scenarios? Around
I,
of.
I think it will be a mix between the first two ones. So hopefully, I'm praying that the hostilities stop. There is no further escalation. But unfortunately, I believe that when we talk about, so I personally take sentiments into account as well. So I have a market sentiment tracker as well. I've shared it with you as well. So in that regard, the rhetoric would stay bullish. So there would be heated exchange of words. There can be some more warnings. There can be this and that, some sort of blame game, and that can keep the traders and money managers and the hedge fund managers on the bullish side. Recently, however, there has been one interesting thing that, so I have been a bear for oil markets from past 1 year, right? And I still believe that fundamentally, if you look at the global economic indicators like global PMI, Chinese PMI, or European PMI, or the manufacturing indices, or the ISM indices from the US, all of them are forward-looking, future-looking indicators, and all of them hint towards, if not a contraction, then a slowdown at least. So I don't know why the oil markets increased, this much. Of course, there is now this geopolitical risk premium, but recently, money managers and hedge fund managers have offloaded a lot of bullish positions. I think from 398 million positions in oil, they're now down to 197 something. So almost, slashing them in half, cutting them in half. So imagine if there would have been no Israel and Gaza conflict. I believe now this narrative that the global economy is in a slowdown, as the IMF also highlighted, the global economic recovery is limping. I think, sans these geopolitical flashpoints, we might see a bear oil market in the future as well, near future.
Yeah, you mentioned the third scenario. That's a very complicated one. So, and we can see some Strait, Hormuz, Suez Canal, and so. What can be, let's see, the complexity of this logistics flow in these canals? Can
So far,
talk a little bit?
yeah, sure. I mean, so far, as much as I know, is that so Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important choke points in the world. I think I wrote it down as well. It carries, a significant portion of oil across the world. Then you have Suez Canal. Then you have then you have the Tamar, or I don't know how to pronounce it properly, Tamar gas field in Israel, and Chevron, which operates most of it, has stopped, its operations there. That accounts for about 1.5% of the global LNG supply. Then there is another field called under, under the same sort of process, where you have delays, or if you have a stoppage of activities there, along with Iran coming in and maybe blocking, in the worst case scenario, blocking Straits of Hormuz, that can cause that can cause oil to spike to about even beyond $150. So all of these choke points that I've shown, then you have Suez Canal, then you have few gas fields in Israel. All of that the geopolitics of this is quite intricate, and it can easily tip things into, you can inadvertently even invite other countries in the conflict as well. Like for
Uh-huh.
instance, recently there was news, and Blinken said this as well, that Azerbaijan might invade Armenia. Recently this was going on. So if that happens, then you have Azerbaijan is supported, or is in the Russian bloc, Armenia is in the US bloc, and then you have this feeding into the wider Middle Eastern conflict. And all of these choke points that we are seeing on the screen, there would be disruptions within them or around them that can
Perfect.
automatically increase the geopolitical risk premium in the form of rising shipping costs, rising insurance premiums, and whatnot.
Perfect. Perfect. There is another picture that I would like to share with you and you or all of our audience. Is Israel top crude oil source, including Brazil. The last one in this picture is Brazil, but Israel is very dependent on Turkey.
Yeah,
Uh, 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 what else?
it's in
Nigeria a little
Turkey.
bit.
Yeah, I read some. So recently there was an article by the same media outlet S&P. It talked about how Kazakhstan, and there was another Central Asian country, if I'm not mistaken, then Azerbaijan. So Israel imports about 270 to 300,000 barrels per day of oil, because it
Oh,
essentially has no oil resources of its own. And there were talks, when Iran called for other Muslim countries to sort of, put a ban on the oil exports there. So there were talks that how could this work? So even in that case, if these both countries stop, they have this option of Brazil, they have Guyana, they have US itself, other African markets. So that might not be a weapon. So that's why we're not seeing much activity in the oil as well. What will be, what has the chance of more disruption is the gas markets, and gas prices, have recently skyrocketed. Um, yeah,
yep,
increasing one by
yep.
one third
It's
in the mid
impressive.
of October. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you believe that they have? Do they have a strategic reserve for oil and for these commodities?
I think so. Yes. I'm not. Yeah, I think so. They would. But even if they do not, I believe so. This comes into this question of when people are comparing this with 1973. So back in 1973, US was not, one of the top oil producers. It was importing oil. The global oil demand was somewhere else. The global geopolitics was somewhere else.
Yeah.
But now, even if there is no oil for Israel from other parts of the world, US can fill in the gap. So it has changed all of these things. Yeah. So it has further implications.
Yeah. Recently, United States probably is very interested on this conflict, of course, to solve very fast this, but they are sending some warships to there, and we cannot understand exactly what are the proposals they have to solve or to, I don't know. But because they are very vulnerable, I mean, United States, because they import 30% probably of the oil they need. What do you
Yeah.
see United
I
States
think
vulnerabilities in?
I think this is a bigger. You have also seen China doing the same, right? So yeah, so I think it's part this Middle Eastern conflict. It's a part of the wider tussle, the great power game between the U.S. and China. Um, uh, so I mean, for the foreseeable future, many events in the world would be or can be termed as a proxy or as a function of the relationship between the US and Chinese governments and then their allies. So you see a lot of activity. China recently held a trans Himalayan conference, at the beginning of the Cricket World Cup. It was joined by Nepal, Bhutan, and Maldives, and so it's sort of China is sort of showing soft power tactics in this region, and naturally it would, because it is the emerging power, the next superpower, and for the US, this might not this might this is definitely something unpalatable. And China recently also did what many analysts have termed as a diplomatic coup, when they sort of made this they break the ice between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So if you're thinking from a bigger picture strategic point of view, this Middle Eastern conflict and other conflicts they fit very neatly into the great power dynamics. And naturally, US would have a stake in it. It would need its actors. It would need its tactical, they need placements everywhere across the world. So does Chinese. Chinese operate on a different way, in a different way. US operates in a different way. US is more blatant in what they do. Chinese are more, overt in what they're doing. But I believe uh, I wasn't surprised at all when US sent its ship there, or when China has done so as well. I mean, it's all but natural for them to do so.
Yeah. And in the case of Russia, that probably is exporting oil and gas to different places instead of Europe now, uh, what might be they thinking about this conflict in
I
Israel?
think Russia has nothing to lose in this, because in any case, if you think from a purely strategic point of view, Russia would there can be Russia can be happy on the prospects of higher oil prices, right? So
Yeah.
I'm when we think about OPEC plus and we think about the production cuts, now that the production cuts have been extended further, I believe, and I've always said this, that Russia would be the first country to just break this production cut, because I don't think, we have seen renewed interest in enforcing the G7 price cap. We have seen renewed, some sort of escalation in the Ukrainian region as well. And I believe for Russia to continue to do these production cuts and also
Uh-huh.
be engaged in war might not be a feasible strategy in terms of money. So if oil prices are increasing, that is playing out well for them. They would be worried if oil prices are falling a lot. They would be worried if oil prices are heading downward. And I believe once this settles down and the global economic growth is in a slowdown, once the realization is accepted across the world, you would see some cracks appearing within OPEC Plus as well. And Russia, I believe, would be the first country that would say, no, we cannot extend the cuts further. So that's
Perfect.
what I think.
Uh, Using this situation nowadays in the globe, you see that China can increase the pressure on Taiwan. Uh, is it something viable?
Yeah, I believe China would. Once again, it will depend. There is what is happening between US and China is very interesting. So the US-China trade war never went away. Many people, I call it, and even in my shows, I always say that it is a tail risk. It always remains a tail risk. It's still there. I mean, and it will depend whether it will take any action regarding Taiwan or not, until unless Taiwan does anything. But for now, the US and Chinese trade war, especially the chip war, the wars of the semiconductors, that has escalated. Recently, China imposed further bans on graphite exports. China, sort of controls 60% of its production. That was a follow up on the previous action taken by the US, where they have further restricted the US companies, the number of US companies that can export or sell semiconductors to China. And before that, you had a ban on the gallium and germanium elements by China. And before that, you had US, adding 10 to 15 Chinese company in the entity list. So it's still going on. And once again, speaking about, just shifting here to the global prospects of global recession and all of these things, this trade war might be one of the triggers that can set into motion a series of events that can cause the next global financial crisis. So yeah,
Perfect.
between China and US, that things remain not very good. In terms of China taking any action against Taiwan, well, it'll depend.
Yeah.
It'll depend. Yes.
Today or yesterday, I'm not sure, the UN Secretary Guterres made a speech, a very complicated speech, and Israel is a very, let's see, not happy with this. Did you see this speech? And
I I must be very honest. I didn't get the time. But I would love to learn what is about.
yep, he make a defense of Hamas reactions and saying that was some kind of aggressive with population, civil populations. So, and Israel didn't like it, so it was very,
Well, I mean, if you look at it from a very neutral point of view as well, uh, you see that there has been, and I think everyone would agree with that, there is no competition between Palestine, Hamas, and Israel. Israel has all everything in the world, and we all know that they have been doing these. They have been, causing these what do we call unlawful settlements in Palestine. There have been mass killings. There have been other issues during the month of Ramadan and Eid and whatnot. So this action by Hamas, which of course we cannot justify on any basis, but this was the culmination or reaction of all of these actions. And we have also seen what sort of a response it has gotten. And it is crazy to see what's happening in Gaza. What is crazy to see what's happening in Palestine. Absolutely, inhumane treatment, and I don't know. So that's why I think organizations like the UN or
yeah,
others, they're just toothless. Uh,
yeah,
you look at every conflict in the world. You look at the Kashmir conflict. You look at the Palestinian conflict. You look at other geopolitical flashpoints. The UN has essentially so the UN is more of a debating platform than a
yeah,
decision-making platform.
a place
Yeah,
to speak. Yeah,
yeah, place to speak, wear suits, give good speeches, come back.
yeah,
That's what it is
ties,
about. Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes.
Rizvi, going to the conclusions, please. So, are we far from a global energy crisis? I mean, the probability is less than 30% or not?
I would say it will depend upon how uh, cold the European winter gets.
Oh,
So for now, because the weather is a very important factor. Right now, the European gas inventories are full, 98%. That would give them a good cushion to go through the winters. But that is assuming that there would be continued imports of gas as well. So if there are no imports, then by even March or Feb, I was reading somewhere the inventory levels can come down to 40%, which would be less than 14% when we compare it to the year back. So we really need to see how well the European winter turns out. We have El Nino, right? It is expected to be stretched into 2024 February. Normally, what it does is that it gets, there are more rains, it gets wetter, but I don't know right now if it has any effect on the intensity of the cold or the winters in Europe. If that happens, if we get winters, if the winters are more cold than expected, then Europe, of course, would increase its demand of LNG. That would cause a supply shortage for countries like Pakistan, and then indeed you would be closer to a global energy crisis. If I am to put it into a percentage, I would say 20-25% chances of a global energy crisis. But so far, things are in control, I believe.
yeah,
The
with the
main
variables that
risk,
we can see.
yeah, but the main risk, of course, is a global economic crisis, and we can talk about it some other time.
Yeah, that's a good topic, no doubts, because economic is going bad. The world is suffering
Yes,
several types of recessions and high price inflation. Yeah, I
yes,
will invite you to have a conversation about economic crisis. Very good.
perfect, perfect, Armando. I would love to. I love to, speak to
Thank
you
you
about that
so
as well.
much, Osama Rizvi. It was a pleasure to hear you, and I hope we can have more conversations like this one.
Perfect, Armando. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye bye.